That's weird though. I don't understand why that just started. Right in the middle.
Lately, I've either had.
I don't care. We needed more to be busy. Plus, we haven't had fires yet.
I was gonna say we're about to go through like monsoon flooding.
I think the monsoon will be very cross our fingers. We've already had 2 big fires.
Should we send people out there?
To a wildfire?
Yeah.
It's horrible because we don't have any access to guides. Scour the they set it up early, right away before the police have time to start walking. It's really a good way to but we rarely can follow. Driving friends.
Yeah.
See the brain going. That's my middle. Okay. That now? Yeah. So your brothers and sisters. Extended family. Oh really? I've got no
Good morning and welcome everyone. I'm Bree Thomas, the CEO of Affirm, the designated Title X agency in Arizona. For those of you unfamiliar with Title X, it is the nation's federally funded and administered family planning grant program. Our goal and our mission as a 49-year-old nonprofit organization is to make sexual and reproductive health care accessible to everyone, particularly for those who may be un- or underinsured at health centers throughout the state. Each year, we serve more than 35,000 individuals at those welcoming health centers statewide, where they receive a range of low or no-cost evidence-based, accurate, and confidential services. Each year, we serve more, these include birth control, STI testing and treatment, pregnancy testing, cancer screenings, and other preventative services. We are here today at a time when access and protection of the right to contraception is more important than ever, as it faces serious, I would even say dangerous, threats to being taken away. We are pleased to have you here this morning to hear about our efforts in Arizona to protect those rights, our rights, that an overwhelming majority of Americans and Arizonans support. We are particularly pleased to have Governor Hobbs with us and for hosting this news conference. Governor?
Thank you. Good morning, everyone. It's a pleasure to be here today to speak about an issue that remains a top concern for Arizonans. Almost a year ago to this day, the Supreme Court decision to overturn Roe v. Wade devastated Arizonans who saw their basic rights being stripped away. As a result, Arizonans scrambled to gain access to the abortion care they needed, and healthcare providers were scared to perform basic life-saving functions. It didn't take long for extremist politicians to turn this into a full court attack on access to reproductive care, including contraception. Just last year, every Arizona Republican in Congress voted against ensuring that every American can access basic contraception. Across the country, we've seen attacks on access to contraception. Legislators who fight to ban birth control like IUD and Plan B. Politicians who are invading our privacy and threatening our health, well-being, and ability to be equal participants in our society. But Arizonans have made their voices heard loud and clear. They will not accept any more attacks on access to basic reproductive health care. And legislators should know that any efforts to take away our reproductive rights will quickly meet with my veto pen. As the first social worker elected governor in the entire country, believe me when I say that reproductive freedom is critical to the individuals and families working hard to create a life for themselves in Arizona. We have a responsibility to protect these freedoms. My message to legislators is this: attacks on reproductive freedoms and basic health care will not be tolerated any longer. If you care about freedom, if you care about the future of our state, you must join me, Representative Salman, and Arizonans from across the political spectrum who believe in protecting reproductive health care.
Thank you, Governor Hobbs, for hosting this MOVES conference and your critical and meaningful support. We are also very pleased to have with us this morning a consistent and committed advocate to the effort to ensure that all Arizonans have access to education, services, and resources for reproductive and sexual health. Please welcome Arizona Representative Athena Salman.
Good morning, everyone. We are here today on the eve of the one-year anniversary of the Supreme Court's Dobbs decision, which overturned Roe v. Wade and 50 years of the court's own precedent protecting the constitutional right to abortion. Roe was not only the foundation for abortion care, but provided the framework for decades more of legal precedent that guarantees everybody's right to contraception, no matter what state they live in. Birth control is a human right, which most American families use and enjoys overwhelming public support. Yet in reading the Dobbs decision, extremists on the high court take a swipe at this right and are in lockstep with bad actors in Congress and Republican-controlled state legislatures across the country in their intent to come after our birth control next. In fact, Arizona already has laws on the books that allow providers to refuse to offer contraceptives and information related to contraception based on their own personal beliefs. Additionally, our previous Republican governor, with support of every Republican legislator, signed into law legal rights to cells at conception, jeopardizing many forms of birth control in Arizona if the current court injunction is lifted on that law. Enough is enough. We believe that contraception is central to a person's privacy, health, well-being, dignity, liberty, equality, and ability to participate in social and economic life. Contraception is especially critical for historically marginalized groups, including Black, Indigenous, and people of color, immigrants, LGBTQ people, people with disabilities, people living in rural and underserved areas, many of whom already face barriers exacerbated by social, political, economic, and environmental inequities to reproductive health care that reduce their ability to make decisions about their own health, their own families, and their own lives. In January, this upcoming January, in conjunction with both legislative Democratic caucuses and with support from millions of Arizonans, I will introduce the Arizona Right to Contraception Act to enshrine access to birth control for all Arizonans. At this historic juncture, my constituents and Arizonans in every single corner of the state are fortunate that this legislation has unequivocal support by our governor, Hobbs, who has made clear that protecting reproductive freedom is a key priority in her vision for an Arizona for all of us. We believe we should not wait for action in DC. We can protect the right to contraception in Arizona now and are committed to boldly pushing forward so that every Arizonan has the peace of mind that access to birth control will be protected.
Thank you, Representative Salman, for your words, your actions, and your advocacy. I'd now like to introduce our final speaker, Pastor Salman Kendrick, who today is representing Americans for Contraception, a national organization dedicated to protecting Americans' rights to contraception and privacy. Pastor.
Hello, I am incredibly grateful to be here, grateful to be a part of this essential conversation. My name is Pastor Shalene Kendrick. I was raised evangelical. I grew up at Scottsdale Bible Church in town. I was born and raised, and I will probably die here in the desert, and then I am here to live life along. Friends, this conversation is essential to me as a spiritual leader, as a theologian, as a pastor, but more importantly, as a woman and as a mom in this space. I have 4 children. I have adopted and given birth. I have essential family planning. The right to plan my family is everything. It is a part of my faith. It's a part of who I am. You all, having access to an IUD in my 30s as a married woman with 4 kids who was earning a Master's of Divinity and also working full-time was necessary. I cannot imagine living in a world where I didn't have access as a grown woman to plan my family the way that I truly believe God is inviting me to do. I can't imagine a world where my 4 kids do not have access to contraception. I didn't think that was a possibility, but when Roe v. Wade was turned, I realized I should probably spend less time watching the Kardashians and Housewives in my off time, and probably more time getting involved in public policy. Friends, for those of you who identify as Christian, public policy and politics is a deeply spiritual position and place and thing that we all need to be a part of. We're talking about medical rights, core rights, medical rights. This is just the beginning. Bodies really matter, especially as a Christian woman. I think of the incarnation, the fleshy, messy business of being a body and having the bodily right, the autonomy, the agency. Autonomy and agency are essential to my well-being and essential to my body and to the bodies of my children and to the bodies of all women. This is going to affect women more than anyone else. So I implore you, stand up and do what is right. We need to make contraception a right. And if that is not enough, we also need to make those who stand against it, they need to be very clear. I love Brene Brown. Clear is kind. We either need to make this a right, or our elected officials need to be clear that they are against the right to medical contraception, medical rights for all bodies. So friends, get in the fight and do it with love and kindness and passion.
And thanks again to Governor Hobbs for hosting us. Thank you, Pastor Kendrick, as well. And for your, thank you to the Governor for your important words and the vital work that you are doing, as well as Representative Salman. Thank you to our supporters and the members of the media for taking time out for today, and we'd be happy to answer any questions you might have.
Representative Salman, for me, the obvious question is, how do you expect this legislation to get through to the finish line when we've got a much more conservative body right now in the legislature?
You know, that's a question I've been asked before, and at the end of the day, when you look at our constituents, and you look at the families that use contraception, this is an issue that cuts beyond party lines. This is an issue that transcends politics. And to the point that the pastor was raising, if you are not in support of your constituents having a guaranteed right to birth control, then the public deserves to know. The public deserves to know. We will push action. We will do our best to get it through. And there really is no excuse from my colleagues on the other side to not prioritize this, given that over 90%, almost close to 98% of families, including in Arizona, utilize some form of contraception.
I plan maybe some kind of outreach to these deep red districts, maybe in Wendy Rogers' district, for example, those deep red districts, to get the message out and just talk to them about it.
At the end of the day, we're going to do all the outreach possible. And we are gonna continue to push this. My hope is that the president and the speaker actually allow this to be heard in the committee. And if we continue to see barriers early on, I think that is a good sign for the public to know that your representatives and this Republican majority does not support birth control if they're not advancing the legislation. I provide room to be pleasantly surprised, and I hope that we are able to get it through.
I'd just like to follow up with the governor real quick. I mean, what are you prepared to do next year, and what kind of leverage are you going to be using in your office to get that legislation passed? I mean, you don't fear using the veto stand. We obviously know that, but what other things can you do as governor to try to get that bill through the legislature next year in an election year?
We are definitely working with, starting our work with legislators right now, and in our office to craft our legislative agenda. Expanding freedoms of Arizonans is certainly on that agenda, including access to contraception. I think we are on the side of Arizonans on this issue. And in an election year, I think legislators on both sides of the aisle would be wise to pay heed to that.
You mentioned that it's an election year, and you all mentioned the 1-year anniversary of the Dobbs decision. Everyone is expecting some kind of ballot measure on abortion rights out here next year. Is that something you're working on, and have you had any conversations with people either here in Arizona or at the national level about launching a ballot measure out here in Arizona for abortion rights?
We've certainly been at the table of folks that are looking at a ballot measure.
Can you say who you've been at the table with?
Not at this time.
Is there any kind of timeline when you expect that to launch?
I think other folks might be able to speak better to that.
There is an effort at this time looking on polling and information that would make it a successful ballot measure, and the group has not yet gone public with that information and will shortly.
They're still working on details and the language exactly what it would
Yeah,
be.
exactly. And there's a huge amount of resources that will be needed, and we're looking at $40 to $50 million, and so it needs to be successful.
Is that funding locked up yet, or still something?
Partial, a bit, but not, you don't just get 40.
Okay, right here, this is for the governor or the representative, but Representative, you said, if your Republican colleagues aren't in favor of this, you'd like them to be on the record saying that. I mean, how much is this really about getting this measure that probably is not going to be popular among the Republican lawmakers passed versus making that point publicly?
As someone who, since the beginning of my adulthood, has utilized contraception, and is continuing to be the beneficiary, being able to plan my own family the way that I see fit, the intent and the effort is to get this passed. And I can't emphasize this enough. If the votes are not there, or if the legislation cannot move because of who the majority put in charge of the Senate or the House, then that majority needs to change. So I want to be very clear. The intent and the effort is to get this passed. But if it fails to pass, people need to know, because this is a right that is under real threat right now. What I am talking about of the law that the legislature passed 2 years ago to enshrine cellular rights in utero at conception currently places Arizona as one of the states where birth control can just be under extreme legal jeopardy at the snap of a court if they lift that injunction. So we are in a crisis right now. This is an emergency. Arizonans right now have the right to know and have the right to have the peace of mind that when they go to bed, their contraception will still be available to them when they wake up in the morning and they carry on with their lives, with their careers, with their families, etc. So, this is personal to me, but it's also very personal to every single family in my district, given that virtually every single family in Arizona uses some form of birth control.
Okay.
Hi, this is for Representative Salman as well. In terms of introducing this legislation and the timing of it, obviously the Dobbs anniversary is coming up, it's upon us, but the legislative session is also winding down. Why introduce it now? Why talk about it now?
We were hopeful, and we continue to support efforts by Washington DC, by Congress, to get this to the president's desk. Ideally and ultimately, again, it should not matter what state you live in. It should not matter what zip code you reside in. There are human rights that are fundamental regardless of that, and so that would protect the entire country, including Arizona. But this is the second year in which every single Republican in DC lawmaker has blocked the right to birth control and contraception, and so we can no longer wait here in Arizona. The threats are very real that we're facing in the courts, and the time for action is now. As you mentioned, this legislative session is winding down, which is why the legislation will be introduced at the beginning of next legislative session.
So if you're introducing it at the beginning of next legislative session, is the purpose of talking about it now just to raise awareness? Like, can you speak specifically to the intent there?
Yeah, thank you. It lines up with the anniversary of the falling of Roe. And in that opinion, when you read Justice Clarence Thomason's concurring opinion, he specifically, let me make sure I get the name of the court cases, but he specifically takes like at Griswold, Lawrence, and Obergefell, which protect birth control and many other rights that support Arizona families. And so I think that piece is lost when we're talking about the fall of Roe. But given that Arizona is a state where my conservative colleagues have already been pretty hostile towards contraception, people deserve to know.
Thank you.
Right here.
Yeah, and I have one more follow-up for the governor. When you're looking at trying to get this legislation through next year, you're looking at setting up a referendum to enshrine the rights of women's access to abortions. Is it your hope, is it your design that you can use next year's election as a referendum on abortion rights to get control of the legislature that you desperately want to try to get your agenda through? Is that the goal?
My agenda is to protect the rights and freedoms of Arizonans. And I think this legislation, a ballot measure to protect abortion rights, is in line with that. That's my focus. And in an election year, voters will have the ability to reinforce that or not. And my agenda is to put forward measures that protect the rights and freedoms of Arizonans.
Any others?
To that point, of course, you let me know earlier this year that you were basically waging war against the Republicans, and you wanted to make an effort to get more Democrats in office. So how is that going?
I mean, I'm certainly focused on building governing majorities in the legislature. The fact that I've vetoed 143 bills so far this year underscores the need for that. And we have a lot of work to do to move forward an agenda that's going to put Arizona on the right path into the future. And it involves passing good legislation, not just vetoing bad legislation. And that's what I'm focused on. And we're continuing to work to recruit candidates across the board and build those majorities that will help us govern in the state.
Right there.
Will Arizona mirror Nevada's right to contraception act that ultimately ended up getting vetoed?
The drafting hasn't begun, so we don't have more specifics besides it'll be followed by the national legislation.
Right.
Do you have any indication that some Republicans might support access to contraception?
I mean,
Yeah. So I want to be very clear. Right now, we know for sure we have 29 votes in the House. Every single Democrat supports the right to contraception. 14 votes in the Senate. Every single Democrat supports the right to contraception. And this is the first time in a very long time that we have a governor that unequivocally supports the right to contraception. I think that there is a possibility that some of my colleagues across the aisle also support this right. But as you see with other critical issues in the state, such as Prop 400, the list can go on. The obstacle is majority leadership. And the obstacle is on an issue like birth control, whether or not they are willing to do what is necessary to caucus and align with the votes that are already there to get the majority, get it over the finish line. It's been done in the past on other issues, and given the crisis that we are in when it comes to access to reproductive health care, including birth control, they have a choice and they have an opportunity to do that with this legislation. Ultimately, the onus and the choice is there, because I believe the votes are there, but it is to be determined whether or not they will go against their leadership.
All right, we have like time for 2 more questions, I think, right there.
You say you believe the votes are there, so have you had any conversations with any Republicans in the House or Senate that they would be willing to entertain anything like this or support it? Have there been any conversations with any of them prior to this press conference?
In previous legislative sessions, there was a year where we expanded access to contraception through pharmacists, and so there's been previous conversations regarding the general idea of contraception. As we're crafting the legislation, we'll go into deeper conversations to see what additional support there is for this.
Does that mean that this year there haven't been any conversations with GOP lawmakers about this?
This year, no, we're gonna craft the legislation and then bring them in. But again, previous years, we have a foundation that we're starting with on trying to get something through.
Is there anyone that you'll utilize to get this through? Any Republican lawmakers that you'll try to utilize to get it through?
All right, I think we got to call a wrap, everybody. Thank you so much for coming.